Hi, and welcome to the quagmire of stat weights in Legion. I get asked a lot of questions regarding stat weights on this channel. A lot. So what are stat weights? Well, put simply, they are the DPS value that we can ascribe to our stats of strength, agility or intellect, along with haste, crit, mastery and versatility. So if crit has a value of 10.93, it means that increasing your crit will increase your DPS by 10.93 per extra point of crit you obtain. However, if gaining more crit means losing a stat with a higher value, then we can end up losing DPS. As such, being able to tell the difference in potential of pieces of gear is an important skill for serious players in World of Warcraft, and stat weights help us to do this with most pieces of gear. It's less effective with relics and trinkets because these items usually contribute features other than raw stats. So working out the DPS contribution for most items of gear is pretty easy. We just multiply each stat by the corresponding stat weight. In previous years, most specs had a fairly static stat priority and weights. You got one stat up to a particular breakpoint or soft cap and then went for another. You could use a set of weights from a forum and not go too far wrong. However, in Legion, developers have made a concerted effort to make all secondary stats useful for all specs. Hasn't all been plain sailing, of course. It's a very complex issue. But what they have achieved is that many specs at least no longer have even a set priority for stats, let alone a universal set of weights. For example, as a Retribution Paladin, I have had all stats bar Mastery as my highest value stat at some point in Legion. As we acquire more in one stat, the relative value of getting more diminishes and the stats left behind become proportionally more valuable. After all, if we have a 10k crit value, then another 500 is a 5% increase, but if we only have 500 versatility, then another 500 represents a 100% increase. In fact, at present, all of my stats, including my primary stat, all have virtually the same weight. I am the Blizzard developer's wet dream at the moment. Sometimes a stat remains a valuable choice because a spec might be getting more and more value from it as it increases. Similarly, another stat may be rooted in last place because we only get sporadic use from it at all, or perhaps the stat budget is way too low. Mastery is a particularly tricky one because it does wildly different things for different specs, yet we all get the same budget for 1% mastery. So when it comes to getting your stat weights, you need to be aware that they are personal to you and not universal for your spec. So when people ask me which stat to favour or even which talent to take, a lot of the time I have to respond that, well, it depends, because there is no cookie cutter answer. Getting stat weights is fairly straightforward, and I've covered this in the first section of a video on using Simcraft some time ago, which I will link just up there. If you haven't seen it yet, I would definitely check that out. Using them for gear evaluation can also be reasonably straightforward for most items using an add-on called Pawn. This can be found in my add-ons playlist. However, we need to remember that the stat weights are not fixed, but that they vary like a complex function on a graph. Stats often interact with each other as well. For example, if we get some extra crit from a food buff or enchant, but the other stats stay the same, that doesn't mean those other stats keep the same value. Getting more or less of one stat can directly affect the value of all the others. This is why asking at what percentage crit, haste, etc. we should switch from using talent A to talent B doesn't really work either. None of these questions are that simple in Legion. So it all comes down to Simcraft, but even when people use it, they do not always do so correctly. The standard settings are for a roughly 5 or 6 minute patchwork style fight. That is to say, pure single target with no movement, interrupts, etc. In reality, almost no raid bosses fit this description, but it is still the standard option used. I mean, patchwork was pretty close to being a patchwork type fight, but there haven't been many since. Now, some variables to consider are adds. If there is any cleaving to be done in the fight, then your stat weights will change. Some stats are stronger for your single target rotation, and others better suited for cleave or AoE. 2. Your choice of talents. For example, if you take a talent that procs on crits, then it will obviously favour crit more than the other talents. If you change talents from fight to fight, then your stat weights will change too. 3. Duration. Try simming yourself with standard options and then change it to a different duration. You'll see that the stat weights change too. You might even see their relative positions change as you get a higher or lower proportion of the fight occurring with your main DPS cooldown. 4. Movement. If you have to move a lot, then you might find yourself using a higher proportion of some abilities than might normally be the case. Different spells and abilities benefit from different stats to different degrees as well. And 5. Being dead. Being dead drops all of your stat weights to 0. This is actually the easiest situation to evaluate, and you don't need Simcraft for this. So when deciding on your stat weights, not only is there not a universal set for your spec, but there isn't even a single set for your individual character. You could actually reevaluate your weights before each new fight. For example, I've just recently killed Mythic Botanist and am now moving on to Mythic Star Augur. These are both single target fights for me personally, and so the patchwork sims are close enough to be valid for me. After that, however, Elisand and Gul'dan will be much more like Beastlord or light movement type fights, and so I should change my options to reflect this in my stat weights. As a matter of course, I tend to have at least 2 profiles in pawn for my main spec, one for patchwork and another for Beastlord type fights. Sometimes a new piece of gear is an upgrade for one type of fight, but not another. In this way, I might switch some items around from fight to fight. So, in summary, you cannot get stat weights from forums, and you should probably not try to even obtain stat priorities from them. Learn to use Simulation Craft if you want to get the most out of your character, and especially be mindful of the need to change options to best match your weights to the content you are aiming for. Also, be prepared to change this when moving on to a different encounter or when receiving significant upgrades. Both of these will alter your stat weights. So I hope you found this video useful as always. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with others for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.